Okay, I'll admit it. I have fantasies. In all of them, I'm tall and athletic, handsome as hell, a successful entrepreneur, and rich as Croesus. And of course, I have an easy and relaxed approach to women. I'm not really like that. I'm average height, average weight, never good at sports, and have always been a support for my outgoing friends. So I had nothing left after the alpha males ate. The term remnant more or less describes my first failed attempt to get rid of the fact that I had never been with a woman. I was at a sorority party when I saw this girl with brown hair. She stood at the other end of the room, looking just as uncomfortable as I am. Neither of us were a couple, so I walked up to her misfortune loves company. She was of normal height, with shoulder-length brown hair, brown eyes, and olive skin color. There was nothing remarkable about her face or figure. She was simply brown. I said, "Hi," and leaned against the wall opposite her. She replied, "Hello," and for some unpleasant time we just stood there, looking at the dancing people. My brain was screaming, "Say something, you idiot," but I couldn't think of what to say. Meanwhile, she looked scared. Inspiration struck, and I said, "My name is Peter, as in a saint, not a rabbit." My poor attempt at being witty. The fact that she didn't run away in terror showed how desperate she was. She looked at me and said, "Susie." She really did have beautiful dark brown eyes. We stood there for some more awkward time. Finally, I said, "Do you want to dance?" I'm clumsy on the dance floor, but I wouldn't have it any other way. She replied, "Sorry, but I don't dance." A woman who doesn't dance. Unprecedented thing. What is she doing here then? We stood there for another painful period of time. She said, "Would you like to go out and get some fresh air? I can't hear myself thinking." Wow, it was a breakthrough. I said, "Of course, okay, that's awkward." And we walked out onto the porch. It was summer, it was hot outside, but inside the party it was even hotter. Therefore, the night air seemed cool and refreshing. She wore classic Bermuda shorts and a spaghetti-strap top that was popular among girls back in the day. I wore an old pair of cut-off jeans and a ratty t-shirt, my standard uniform. I was desperately trying to figure out what to say, so I tried the usual conversational technique for us students. "So what are you studying?" She said, "Nothing. I'm a city girl. Bill Worth brought me, but he left with his friends and left me alone." Wirt was one of those idiots who made us peasants miserable. I thought to myself, Wirt brought her. She must have some hidden talent. I blurted out, "Well, I would never leave you at a party. You're too beautiful." I didn't really mean it, but I started to like her. I had a puppy dog eyes. She said, "Do you really mean it?" I lied, "Of course. I wouldn't leave a hot girl like you lying around." She said rather defensively, "How do you know I'm sexy? Who were you talking to?" Okay, that was a little unexpected. I hesitated a little and said, "Nobody, you're just beautiful, that's all." I started to sync with her. She must have felt the same way because she melted a little and said, "I work at the loft. You should come by sometime." I felt like I might be getting closer to my first real result. She wasn't a movie star, but me too. She exuded a complete lack of sophistication, which was my advantage. But she also exuded a subtle hint of sexuality. It was a classic catch-22. I haven't actually had adult sex yet, but I really wanted to try. I just needed to meet a girl experienced enough to know how to do it, but not so experienced that she wouldn't be interested in a 20-year-old guy who hasn't had sex before. This girl looked like she met both criteria. I was thinking about it when she started leaning towards me with her sleepy eyes, and we kissed. We were silent for a second, just looking at each other. I was absolutely sure that I would score a goal. That's when Bill Worth reappeared. He said with contempt in his voice, "Susie, what the hell are you doing here?" and pulled her towards him by the waist. He didn't even notice how out of breath she was, which was probably fortunate for both of us since he was the starting quarterback on the football team. He was huge. He added, looking at her angrily, "I was with my friends for a little while and you just left. If you want to be with me, you better watch your behavior, bitch. At that moment, I wish I could bring this guy down to my knees and make him apologize for being such an asshole. Instead, I just stood there, staring into space. I'm not aggressive, and I don't have such instincts. It seemed to me that Susie was humiliated, but she immediately turned around and said to Wirt, "What was I supposed to do when you left me standing aside for an hour?" He said, "I had things to do, and I expect you to wait for me while I do them." I had a pretty good idea of what these things actually were, because a little earlier I saw him walk past me towards the parking lot with a very drunk Becky Allmendinger. Maybe he was going to rush her to the hospital to check for alcohol poisoning. Or maybe he spent an hour having sex with her in the back seat of someone's car. Who knows? Anyway, Susie turned Fredoys to Beggins and said, "I was just talking to Peter while you were away. It wasn't that big of a deal." It was encouraging to discover that I was not that important. He looked at me and said disdainfully, "Stay away from my girlfriend, or you and I will have a serious conversation." He was half a head taller. I didn't think this was world politics, so I just watched. She went without objection. My alter ego would have made this scoundrel beg for mercy at this moment, but I actually just stood there, looking at them disapprovingly. A judgmental look was the best I could come up with at the time. As I watched them disappear, I was suddenly almost sure what her hidden talent was. This was confirmed when I was upstairs peeing. Susie's top was lying on the floor in the hallway, and sounds were coming from the nearby bedroom. Lesson well done, and needless to say, I never saw Susie again. In the meantime, I finally dealt with my little problem of sexual experience. It was almost the same situation. I was at one of those street parties in the local park. This was an event that the Greeks sometimes held at the end of summer. I was, as usual, without a date. The party itself was held from the back of a truck F-150, which was parked in the parking lot next to the field. The entire area was surrounded by very dense forest. I wandered drunk among the trees. This was mainly because I was sick of watching the men and women of Phi Alpha and Lambda Tau get drunk. Total inebriation was such a weekly ritual among our student community that it made me wonder how the university managed to achieve its sterling academic reputation. So I thought it would be interesting to see what was in the forest. Boredom, loneliness, and the foamy stuff they were dispensing from the back of a pickup truck fueled my curiosity. In any case, I was wandering aimlessly among the trees when I came across a female figure. Looks like one of the sorority girls climbed into the bushes to die. She was stretched out on her back on a soft bed of pine needles and leaves under one of the trees. The vision was strangely reminiscent of the scene of the dead soldier from the book The Red Badge of Courage. She wore a classic sundress, and in her fainting, she managed to lift the hem of her dress so high that it seemed as if from the waist down she was wearing nothing but panties. I walked over and looked to make sure she wasn't dead. It was more out of curiosity than anything else. It's not every day you see a picture like this. I didn't intend to do anything more dishonest. And yes, I know that I'm a pervert. I am a boy. At this moment, the body groaned heavily, and I sat down to check on her condition, not quite Galahad, but at least I showed concern. When I did this, she opened her eyes, looked at me vaguely, and mumbled, "Who are you?" I was about to answer her when she said in a decisive voice, "Okay, you'll come." And she grabbed me and we had sex. I didn't know who she was, and to be honest, I was a little dazed from my first sexual experience and, of course, drunk. My noble alter ego would have stayed and called for help, but she actually looked peaceful lying there. So instead, I stood up and pulled her dress down. After all, I'm a gentleman. Then I wandered back to the party for more. I never saw her again. I don't even remember what she looked like. And as far as I know, little Peter Ostrovsky is running around out there somewhere. But that first pathetic case of questionable sexual ethics, and I'm not sure who was to blame, opened the floodgates. I must have slept with half the unattractive girls on campus before I graduated. I wasn't interested in building up my social credit. I just wanted to repeat that experience. And frankly, all cats in the dark are gray. In fact, I have always believed that less popular girls exhibit much more inspired and noble behavior, and you can really improve your technique with some practice. At least I had no complaints. I graduated from the Ross School of Business in Ann Arbor without any honors, and he took his MBA and went to work at Ford. Then followed 5 long years in the godforsaken wasteland of the world cubicles. It was a marmot town with about 500 souls running around in their little 6 by 8 foot wheels. We were all packed into one huge room, but at least I advanced to the office, which was 8 by 10. It was a sign of favor and advancement in our anonymous universe. I also had a cobalt blue Mustang GT. The A plan was one of the perks of working at Ford. This car made me feel a little less bland and more like a hot commodity. So one Friday after work, I was sitting with some of my fellow slaves in the galleys. We were on the open veranda at Andiamos. I lived in a condo on Garrison Street, not far from Andiamos. It was an easy walk back to my place, so I could drink as much as I wanted on a Friday night without worrying about the long drive home. There were some new faces among the group. This always happens because Ford is a big place and people come and go. As I sat down, I looked across the table at a girl I had never seen before. She had thick red hair, and she had the milky white skin and perky nose of a typical Irish woman, freckles included. Her laughing emerald green cat eyes looked at me with humor and intelligence. She was neither big nor small, somewhere around 5 feet 6 inches. And apart from the fact that she looked so distinctly Irish, there were no other special features. However, I was captivated by those bright green eyes. My friend Mary, who worked with me on our Tiger team, was sitting next to her. She said, "Peter, meet Janet McCarthy. She works in client management, and we're working on a new interface together." Mary then turned and continued her conversation with the guy who was sitting next to her, duty completed. I didn't have the impression that this was a pure coincidence, so I said something like a good-natured "hi" and went back to my usual shy silence, just looking at her. Several seconds passed, and finally she said sarcastically, "Do you like what you see?" I replied, "Sorry, you are so beautiful that I am speechless." This statement brought a smile that was pure Connemara on a bright spring day. She flirtatiously said, "So I'll take that as a yes." I said with conviction in my voice, "It's definitely a yes." The room was full of conversation, so I said, "I want to talk, but I can't hear it with all the noise. Have you eaten? I know a place that makes the best hamburgers in the world. If you want, I'll show you." This brought out another delightful smile. She really did have a wide, sensual mouth. And she said, "I'd love to go out to eat with you." I hate situations like this. I only came because Mary told me she has a hot guy she wants to introduce to me. Since I don't see him here, I think I'll leave with you. Wow, the ironic tilt of her lips told me she was joking. I hoped so. I took her to Miller's, a bar that was close to where I was and actually served the best burgers in the world. We talked for hours and drank several pitchers. To put it mildly, we were compatible. And then, at that moment, in the depths of my soul, I knew that I was going to marry her. I have no idea why I was so sure, but I was sure of it. It was something about the way we connected. It just felt right. Neither of us were in any condition to drive, so we left the Mustang in the Miller's parking lot and lurched our way to my place. I'd like to say we shared a night of passion, but we both more or less passed out. I woke up at dawn in a puddle of drool and lay across the sofa. She somehow made it to my bedroom and was lying face down on the bed, fully clothed. I covered her with a blanket while I examined her body. She was slender with delicate shoulders, a narrow waist, narrow hips, a beautiful ass, and long, absolutely gorgeous, slender, muscular legs. Her thick copper hair ended right between her shoulder blades, and even after a night of cruel excess, they looked as beautiful as when I first saw her. I believe that such perfect hair is what God gave the Irish in exchange for not being able to go out in the sun with their pale skin. I was frying bacon when she showed up. She was wearing one of my shirts and seemingly nothing else. One copper curl was thrown over her eye. She said 2 words, "Coffee urgent." I handed her a large mug of hot coffee and she collapsed into the kitchen chair. She said, "You look as bad as I feel." I replied, "I think we got hit by a beer truck yesterday. Thank God it's Saturday." I added, "After all this drinking, it's good to get some nutritious fat in your stomach. If you drink orange juice and eat this, you'll feel better." And I put a plate of bacon and eggs in front of her. She attacked the food with the appetite of a hungry grizzly bear. When she finished, she peeked suspiciously out from under her hair and said, "Did we have sex yesterday? Doesn't feel right, but I don't remember much after we left Miller's." I said, "I think not. You were on the bed and I was on the sofa, and I think I would remember such a significant event as our first time." She looked funny and said, "What makes you think this is our first time?" I said, "Because I'm going to remove this obstacle right now." We got busy love. She finally opened one eye and said, "That was the most amazing sex of my life. When can we do it again?" I said, "Whenever you want, darling, 'cause I'll never let you go." And so it was. She moved in with me that same week, and we got married in a civil ceremony at the end of next month. We both didn't have much family or even friends, so it was just a quick legal exercise with witnesses that we found nearby the courthouse. The honeymoon in Cabo lasted 2 weeks, and she tried to kill me throughout this idyllic period. Surprisingly, when we returned, the sex never subsided. We simply began our new life together as if we had been leading it for many months. 3 years later, by this time we had both moved up the career ladder. I became the chief architect of the enterprise, and Janet headed the customer service department of one of the products. Our combined income was enough to buy a very nice house in Dearborn, and we lived the life of a typical high-income family without children. Then we had 2 children in a row, 1.5 years apart. First, there was Sarah, then Dean. Janet took full maternity leave both times, and I tried to help as much as I could. Life is back to normal, except for one big change. Janet had now given birth to our allotted number of children, 2.5, if you count me as at least half a child, and she said she didn't want any more children. We were still having sex like crazy, so I suggested getting the procedure done since she had made all the sacrifices before. This sounds like a simple operation, and it is, but it's still painful. But I dealt with it, and the days merged into years, and the children grew into teenagers. 18 years have passed since the wedding. I was 42 years old, and I was still a little old. I felt like I was no closer to the person I wanted to be, and I looked the same as I did in college, only better dressed. I still couldn't do anything in sports, and my attempts to be the life of the party were funny even to me. Janet, on the other hand, has blossomed into a stunningly beautiful 41-year-old woman. The cute little Irish face has grown into a full-fledged Celtic beauty. Her clear skin could keep her out of the sun, but also ensured that there wasn't a single wrinkle on her face, and her high cheekbones and perfect Irish features glowed with inner feminine beauty and confidence. Now, when Janet walked into the room, every man looked and every one of them wanted her. However, other than her striking appearance, we were very similar people. She was not interested in sports and never went to the gym. Her slender body had gained a few extra pounds since giving birth, but they were in all the right places. And unlike any other woman I knew, she hated dancing or even socializing. Her whole life was built around me and our family. She was a wonderful mother and an even better best friend. She was always ready for adventure, so we explored the world together. At first, there were kids with us everywhere. Then, when they grew up, we were accompanied by 2 proto-adults, and sex was like a refresher course. The connection this created was a special gift to our marriage. In public, we were 2 efficient professionals raising a couple of wonderful children, but the sexual intimacy that existed between us reinforced our faith in life together. In the dark hours of the night, we all know that deep down we are completely alone. But Janet and I drew so much comfort from our common affection that it fused our individual souls into one spirit. Essentially, we felt like we were moving through life as one because we were so aligned physically. There are long-term marriages where one spouse dies and the other follows immediately. I can understand that. I know this sounds melodramatic, but I really couldn't imagine life without Janet. She was my necessary soul mate. By the time we celebrated our 18th anniversary, I had finally secured the corner office. It wasn't as fun as it might seem, since with real walls and a door came a ton of responsibility. Part of my responsibilities was to manage equipment and services for our unit, which is why I was sitting at my desk when my old enemy William Wirt walked through the door. I haven't seen him since that fateful night on the porch in Ann Arbor, but I recognized him immediately. Of course, he didn't know who I was, but even then he never knew who I was. He had put on weight, about 10 pounds of which now lay beneath the fat on his several chins. He also suffered from severe alopecia, which resulted in him shaving his head. All I could think about when he sat down across from me with all that pink skin sticking out over his tie was that he looked like a 290-pound penis. Of course, he had not lost his sense of self-confidence, and the company he now owned could make him even more arrogant than he had been in the old days. He exuded aggression, an aggressive ego, and an almost delusional self-confidence. I showed no reaction as he reached across the table to shake my hand vigorously. It's been 20 years since we last saw each other, and then I was a nobody. But now I was in charge, and he knew it. His company provided services to Ford. The contract was not large by our standards, but that was all for him, and he needed our business. We have used Verta's services for the past 20 years. His father made Worth president and CEO when he retired 3 years ago, and since the transition, we have received constant complaints about poor quality work. I met with Wirt to look into this. He started with his standard, healthy, how are you approach, which has always been his standard tactic. I knew he thought I was just a corporate nerd, but since the shoe was temporarily on the other foot, he was going to treat me like his best friend. We haggled over the list of issues until 5:30 p.m. He pretended to check his gold Rolex Yachtmaster watch and said, "Hey buddy, I'm hungry. How about we continue the conversation over dinner at the Henry?" I replied, "My wife is waiting for me at home. We always have dinner together." I saw that he thought that I was under my wife's thumb, but he continued his cheerful facade. "Let's just take the baby with us. Call her. I'll treat you." The last thing I wanted was for Janet to be influenced by this guy. She hated braggarts, and Wirt was one of the worst. But I was between a rock and a hard place. I had an advantage in our negotiations, and I did not want to lose it. However, I also didn't want to leave Janet sitting at home alone, so I called her and asked if she would like to meet us at Tria. She said, "Wow, who do I owe this honor to? You would never take me to such an expensive place." I replied, "The supplier pays, and we will discuss matters, but I didn't want to leave you at home if you wanted to go." She said, "I'd love to go, especially if we don't pay. I'm guessing you want me to dress up." I replied, "He's just a supplier, but let's see if you can hit him." I was going to give the asshole some change for the incident on the porch. She said, "I will be on full alert. I love you," and hung up. She showed up an hour later. She went all out. We sat at a table on the other side of the room. This was as far from the entrance as possible. Therefore, she had to walk through the entire restaurant in her 10-centimeter stilettos. That gorgeous ass wriggled enticingly as she walked towards us. She was a beautiful, confident woman in a tight little black dress. The dress perfectly highlighted her best feature, that thick mane of copper hair, and the cutout front showed off her large, round breasts. A small gold chain with one perfect diamond bobbing in the gorge between these two impressive hills was the finishing touch. Her huge emerald cat eyes were hypnotic, and her wide, sensual mouth is impeccably painted to highlight her knowing smile. Her freckles and perky nose made her look like the hottest and most sophisticated girl next door. She approached us, not taking her eyes off me, and I couldn't stop looking into these two deep lakes of love. I thought to myself, how lucky am I? I looked at Wirt to gauge his reaction. It looks like he swallowed his tongue. His jaw almost touched the table, like a cartoon wolf game, set and checkmate in favor of Janet Ostrovskaya. We both stood up as she approached the table. She gracefully extended her hand to Wirt and said, "I am Janet, Peter's wife." Wirt looked at her with pure delight. He then put his mask back on and turned into good old Bill. He laughed loudly and said, "Well, he sure knows how to choose. Were you an actress or model before you got married?" Janet blushed and replied, "No, I'm the director of customer relations for dealers in this region. I've been working in customer relationship management since before I met Peter." He laughed again and said, "Well, I'd like to be your client." It might sound like a harmless flirtation, but there was another subtext to it. We both decided to ignore him, and we all sat down at the table. Throughout the dinner, Wirt dominated the conversation. He was paying, so I just let him talk. He was clearly courting Janet, and I didn't blame him. She looked especially attractive that evening. His way of impressing a woman was to talk about his possessions. According to him, his house, which was on a lake in Oakland County, was the largest in the development. His boat was the fastest on the lake. His many cars were expensive classics, and he rubbed shoulders with every celebrity and influencer in the Detroit area. Oh yeah, and as an afterthought, he mentioned that his wife and kids are really cute too. After the second bottle of wine, he stopped talking to me. In fact, he turned his back to me in his seat so that he put himself between Janet and me. Most people trying to seduce someone would be a little more subtle about it. But this guy has always been extremely arrogant, and he was used to getting any woman he wanted, so he was very direct and persistent with Janet. He continued to drop suggestive hints about his sexual abilities. In fact, he became so aggressive. Janet didn't overdo it on her part. She is into customer service and knows how to treat people, especially with men like Wirt. So by the time we finished dinner, she had convinced him that he was indeed a very interesting person to her. As soon as we got back into the car, she angrily said, "This man is absolutely disgusting. He didn't give me space all the time. How do you even contact him?" I replied, "He owns a company that is completely dependent on our business. When we first started working with them, they were a top-notch supplier. But since he took control, things have gone downhill. It has gotten so bad that we are trying to decide whether to look for someone else. But I thought I'd give him a chance to convince me otherwise. I need to do a little more checking, but I think we will not continue cooperation." She said, "If the way he behaved tonight is any indication, I understand why his company is failing. He is tyrannical, verbose, and rude." I noticed that Janet was particularly demanding in bed that night. I think that despite what she may have thought about the scoundrel, his attention definitely turned her on. I had to admit to being jealous. The next day, I continued negotiations with Worth. It was clear that he thought he had convinced me with dinner. It was also obvious, at least to me, that he was too much interested in my wife. He asked me everything about her, how we met, and what the current state of our marriage was. At one point, he even said, "I bet she's a bomb in bed." I told him that I did not appreciate these types of comments, and that if he wanted to continue doing business with us, he should keep it professional. He responded with his characteristic smug attitude. "It was just a compliment, mate. There is no need to aggravate it so much. I'm a magnet for women, and your hot wife clearly appreciated what I suggested. It just happens." The person I would like to be would have pulled him out of his chair and fucked him all over the office. In 5 short sentences, he humiliated both me and my wife. But instead, I gave him a look that said he was on very thin ice. I hated being such a weakling. But what options did I have? If I had insisted on my way, he would have swelled up like a grouse in mating season. And he knew it would be extremely awkward to discuss something as personal as my wife's abilities in bed, right here, in front of all my colleagues. I still needed to work here. We continued to haggle for the rest of the morning. We agreed on the last sentence and shook hands, not very friendly, I might add, and he set out to make other people's lives miserable. This was on Tuesday. On Wednesday and Thursday, the respective managers and I spent the entire day in meetings deciding what to do. My people kept digging, and the general consensus was that we could get much better quality at a lower price if we went to a competitor. But I had to tell Vert the news. I felt like I had to tell him this face to face. That's how I've always done business, and I wanted to maintain civility. So I called him on Friday morning and told him I would meet him at the Dearborn Inn at 5:00 p.m. We have a permanent presence there considering Henry Ford built it. So the lobby of this famous old hotel seemed the perfect place to finish our business. His tone of voice let me know that he thought I was going to seal the deal. When he walked in, I was standing there with Tom O'Malley, who was our vice president of corporate purchasing, and Vic Ravi, who was our IT guru. Wirt approached us as if he was about to cash in a winning lottery ticket. He no longer maintained the good old Bill facade. Instead, he exuded his perceived superiority. I looked at O'Malley, and he looked a little worried. I thought, we have to get this sorted out as soon as possible. I said, as sympathetically as I could, "Sit down, Bill. We need to talk about our contract." He smiled in what could only be described as a smirk and sat down in the fourth chair. He leaned forward and said to the three of us, "I knew you couldn't find anyone better." It hung in the air for a couple of seconds. I exchanged glances with Tom and Vic and said, "That's the point. We already found it. So we are terminating your contract at close of business today. If you have questions, ask them now." I saw the news dawn on him. In a matter of seconds, he went from complete self-confidence to complete anger. It was an amazing transformation. I understood his reaction. Our business made up the majority of his company's income. If we refused, he would have few options, and none of them were good. He said loudly and angrily, "You can't do this." I replied, "We can, and we do. We just don't think you're right for us. It's a matter of trust in your services." O'Malley chimed in, "Our lawyers have looked at this from every angle, and legally, this is an impeccable situation. We have already sent a written notice to your company by courier. We're sorry, but we can't afford any more disruptions." Ravi added, "We've had 2 more glitches this week, and it's costing us a lot of money." Wirt stood up from his chair. He was much larger than any of us, and he was furious. We all stood up with him. I tried to calm him down by saying, "We wanted to give you a chance, but it didn't work. I'm sorry." And I extended my hand for the last handshake. Wirt exploded with rage. Saliva sprayed from his mouth as he screamed, "You're sorry? You have no idea how much you'll soon regret this, you cuckold coward. I will sleep with your wife. She'll love it, and there's nothing you can do about it. In fact, I think I'll keep her for a while as my personal prostitute." I heard the words, but could not comprehend them. I just stood there, not saying anything, with my hand hanging limply in the air and my mouth wide open. Then, without saying a word, Wirt turned and walked out the door. I remembered an incident 20 years ago and was brought back to the feelings of inferiority I had before meeting Janet. My colleagues seemed amazed and sympathetic. I must have looked absolutely devastated. The person I wish I was would be able to shrug it all off with a witty joke. But I knew the story would be spread throughout the operations building by close of business on Monday. Worse, I believed that Wirt would do what he promised, and this caused a thunder of enormous jealousy in me. I know I tend to doubt myself. Perhaps this is a consequence of always being picked last at baseball games and the fact that I spent all social events standing on the sidelines with others' wallflowers. Janet changed all that. I felt like a special person because she was so special. However, I was also alarmingly aware that Janet was now out of my league. When we first met, and for many years after that, our social status was roughly equal. But at 41, Janet has blossomed into the ultimate trophy woman, while I have moved into middle age. Perhaps Worth sensed the difference between our social status and planned to act on it. His shaved head gave him a dangerous and exciting look, and he simply radiated confidence that every woman he met was eager to try him. Unfortunately, my innate insecurities told me that I wouldn't be able to keep Janet if Wirt really started hitting on her. When it came to seduction, he was an apex predator, and I could tell that Wirt really wanted my wife. Janet never expressed dissatisfaction with me or our life together. In fact, it was the other way around. We spent every moment of our lives together, except when we were at work, and she was always in a hurry to come home to me, just as I was in a hurry to go home to her. But Wirt was big and extremely confident, and he slept with everyone. There was something about his assumption that every woman wanted to submit to him, perhaps pheromones or an alpha male attitude, but whatever it was, I had evidence that it was effective. And now he's targeting my wife. My stomach was churning as I drove home. I just knew I was going to lose her, and the thought of it was killing me. However, I solved problems as they came. Janet and I always discussed important things honestly and openly. So tonight we had to have one of those conversations, even if it would make me look paranoid and a coward. I arrived home first. She arrived a couple of minutes after me. She looked tired, but she works a lot more than me. All this interaction with unhappy customers is draining her. I prepared the sushi from Crave on the way home and laid it out on a platter with a couple of cold Asahi bottles. She saw what was waiting for her and her eyes lit up. She loves sushi. She said, "Let me get out of these things and I'll see you on the patio." It was a warm October day, and it would have been a shame to waste the sunshine. We probably won't see him again for 5 terrible months in Michigan, so I moved our feast to the street table. She came out looking fresh and cheerful, wearing a patchwork blouse and yoga pants that showed off her beautiful hips and a magnificent ass. As far as I was concerned, she could be the mother of a 15-year-old, but she still had the sexiest body in the Midwest. I got straight to the point. I said, "There is a serious matter I need to talk about." Janet is an intelligent and sensitive woman. She could tell something was bothering me, so she instantly switched to full concentration mode. Was a bit embarrassing how quickly she could concentrate. I continued, trying to sound serious. "I just met with Bill Wirt to terminate his contract. The meeting was as you might imagine. But what I want to talk about happened when he left. That was very disturbing, and we need to resolve it." Something flashed across her face. I thought, oh my God, he was already there. I tried to keep my voice calm and said, "I don't know a better way to say this, so I'll just say it. We have always been honest with each other, and that is why I believe in you and in our marriage." She gave me a loving smile and took my hand the way women do to show connection. I continued, trying to convey seriousness in my tone. He was very angry when he left, and inches in anger, he told me that he planned to, in his words, sleep with you and make you his personal woman of easy virtue, in revenge for the fact that we broke ties with him. He said there was nothing I could do about it. He was always the kind of person who defined himself through his sexual conquests, and I think he'll try to add you to his list. Janet screamed. Instead of turning pale with guilt, she sat there, becoming redder and redder. I saw that I had lit the fuse of her Irish temperament, and she was about to explode. She is passionate at heart, and sometimes her control slips. It was one of those moments. She was mad with rage. She stuttered for a couple of seconds, and then said, "I'll kill him." I thought to myself, that sounds like a confession. I was stunned. Her sudden change of mood even surprised me. The cheerful and loving wife a few seconds ago was replaced by a crazy one. She said, "That idiot has been calling me every day since Monday asking to meet. I told him in no uncertain terms that I was not interested. But he has no shame and is absolutely furious. He just doesn't seem to hear me when I say I'm not interested. I should have told you, but so far it's only been mildly annoying, not important in the big picture. I just assumed that sooner or later he would understand and leave me alone. Now I see that this is more than just the childish antics of some aging pervert. It humiliates both of us. This hints that you are a weakling, and I am a woman of easy virtue. So what are we going to do with it? A blissful wave of relief washed over me that could have made the Fukushima tsunami seem like a minor disturbance in the bathroom. All I could think about was how much I loved my determined and strong wife. Janet began to calm down, but she was still pacing the patio, as if she was looking for something or someone to hit. I've never seen her so angry. But the unapologetic impudence of a guy like Wirt can cause such a reaction in an intelligent woman. She finally calmed down enough to start eating, but she was still seething. It was obvious that her mind was working on a problem. Then suddenly she put down her beer, leaned forward, grabbed my hand and said, "I have an idea. How much do you trust me?" I answered, "With my life." My voice suddenly wavered. I was still excited by the undeniable evidence of fidelity she had just provided. She put many ghosts to rest. She said, "So maybe Bill Wirt and I should go on a date." This statement didn't kill me. It did make my heart skip a few beats, though. She smiled at me with a mischievous smile. I knew she had a lot of naughtiness in her Irish soul, and I could see that she had a plan for Mr. Verta. She smiled wickedly and said, "How about I dress up and spend the evening making him think he's going to get what he wants? And when he makes his move, I'll tell him all the ways he can never measure up to you as a man." I loved it. It was probably the dumbest plan I've ever heard. But this was pure Janet. Janet is very proud and brave. She couldn't just let the insult slide. She had to get some form of direct payback. And as far as she was concerned, the more spectacular and active the payback, the better. Of course, this shocked me. There were serious problems, and I outlined each of them. First of all, she'd be alone with the jerk, and she had no defense against the type of physical attack he was capable of. Secondly, she had no idea how sneaky and dirty this guy could be, especially when it came to achieving his goals. And the worst thing is Murphy's Law. This little axiom that says that something unexpected will turn an attempt at personal retribution into a disaster. She smiled at me indulgently and said, "You know that I already had sexual experience when we met. I have years of experience dealing with scum like Vert, and he will never touch me, not while I have it." She stood up gracefully, went into the house, and returned with hair asp. She placed it on the table with a smug grin on her face. She's one of those women who hates being protected by a man, not that I'm any good at it. So she spent time training with a personal trainer to learn how to use a fighting stick. "That's 2 feet of lethal force packed into 8 compact inches," she said. "I'll have this baby in my purse, and I just hope he tries to do something." She was right. Janet is not what one would call a timid woman. In fact, she's furious, and her training with a stick during class was intimidating. However, firmly I believe in karma, and I had a bad feeling about deliberately teasing this narcissistic bastard. Janet has always been the braver of us. She's a woman and has never experienced the type of physical bullying that the average guy faces growing up. Accordingly, when it came to confronting bad people, she never learned lessons caution versus courage. I actually argued with her for quite a long time, but her stubborn little mind was determined. Wirt humiliated both me and her, and she wanted to take revenge on him in the same way. So the following Monday, she returned from work, looking like the proverbial cat that ate the canary. I said, "He called, didn't he?" Worth only called her at work. She said cheerfully, "Indeed, he called, and next Friday we will go to dinner with a large portion of humiliation for dessert. He wanted to do it tonight, but I told him I couldn't leave you until Friday. This will give us time to refine our plans." I said, "I'm only going along with this because you can't get it out of your head, but I have to say that I don't like it." She laughed cheerfully and said, "I know you are a kind and gentle person. I hope the phrase, 'helpless coward,' didn't slip between the lines. And I know that you are ready to leave everything as it is." With luck, it didn't mean too cowardly to challenge him. But I just can't let it go. As soon as he questioned my loyalty and called me names, I knew I had to call him out. Maybe it's a cultural thing. My wife is Irish. Her violent temperament makes her confront anyone about anything. I'm Pole, and with the Germans on one side and the Russians on the other, my people learned long ago not to wake up sleeping dogs. Besides, I was already enjoying the moment of revenge, but I did it my way, quietly. After losing our business, and thanks to a few phone calls I made on Monday, Worth went bankrupt. He just didn't know about it yet. The plan was simple. She would meet him for dinner at Andiamo's. She would be dressed to drive him crazy. She would then flirt with him to keep him interested. When he finally proposed, and there was no doubt he would, because Janet might seduce a stone idol, she planned to tell him what she really thought of him and throw a drink in his face. I was actually hoping it would be hot coffee. She would then make a spectacle of it by joining me as I arrived from the parking lot for a hug and kiss before we left stage left. It would be a fitting ending, like a Shakespearean play. The plan seemed impenetrable. It was in public. Worth would not do anything in front of witnesses, and once Janet challenged him, she would be safe before he could respond. And best of all, it would put a wonderful end to my relationship with this idiot. But I still had conditions. I obviously couldn't be seen until the grand finale, but I wanted to keep my eyes on the target the whole time. So it had to happen at Andiamo's, since the bartender there was a good friend of mine. Of course, I saw him many times, and I tipped him very well. And I needed to be nearby. I couldn't sit in the parking lot, but I could sit in the museum parking lot around the corner. I was counting on a call from my bartender friend Mario when it was time for me to go on stage. I was sitting with Dean working on his school project when she came down the stairs, dressed for a date. I actually chuckled in sheer surprise. She was a stunning combination of copper hair, porcelain skin, emerald eyes, and bright red sensual lips. She went all out with her makeup and hair. Her high cheekbones, sprinkled with freckles and huge green eyes, were captivating. She always had magnificent legs, slender and muscular, and she showed them off in a dress that ended a few inches above the knee. Walking in 4-inch heels only accentuated that gorgeous bubble butt. But the newest addition to her arsenal of tools is a pair of much larger titmus. They were kindly provided by the children. When we met, she had dainty little B-cups. But as soon as Sarah arrived, Janet transformed into a full round pair of C-cups that were so high on her chest and fitted tightly to her that, bra or no bra, she had natural cleavage. They almost didn't seem real. However, through extensive tactile testing, I can attest that every inch and pound of it is genuine. She posed at the bottom of the stairs and said, "Do you like it?" That was our catchphrase. She used it to remind me who exactly this exquisite body belonged to. I was amazed by her beauty. At the same time, a wave of senseless uncertainty ran through me. I knew all the aspects of motivation and planning, but I still felt a pang of pure jealousy when I saw her dressed for another man. And she was so tenderly feminine that I couldn't imagine how she could even accomplish what she planned. But underneath all her pure sex appeal, my wife is a warrior. I went over to hug her. I knew better than to kiss her and ruin her intricate makeup. Her perfume amazed me. She gave me a bright smile. I saw that she was enjoying it. This reminded me that Native Americans would hand over their captives to women, that is, if they wanted to be properly tortured. Women are ruthless when you ruin their families. She said, "See you in a couple of hours, sweetie. Please don't be late." She then gave me a mischievous Irish grin and closed the door. I heard her car start and drive away. I grabbed my coat and Kindle, told Dean to behave while I was gone, and walked out into the beautiful fall evening. The taillights of her tourist show had already disappeared on our street when I got into mine F-150 King Ranch. The Mustang I had when I was single is long gone, but this truck looked like a luxury car with sporty handling. I knew it would take Janet 2 or 3 hours to bring the hammer down properly on Mr. Bommersworth, so I drove the 150 into the deserted parking lot behind the Dearborn Historical Museum. I tuned the excellent audio system to the local classical music station and opened my recently acquired copy of the latest Jack Reacher novel. In my dreams, I'm 6'5" tall and have 250 pounds of hard muscle. So, Major Reacher and I have a lot in common. I imagined what was happening in the restaurant. I was sure that Janet's stunning looks would make Wirt look lusty as Billy the Goat. I was also confident that Janet would give him full treatment. Either way, she's a bit of a tease. Flirting is as natural to a beautiful woman as preening is to a peacock. After all, a woman like Janet has been fooling guys since she was a teenager. Therefore, manipulating men is as natural for her as throwing stones for little boys. Just as I was getting to the good part, my phone vibrated. It had only been an hour and a half since Janet had left, so I said hello, puzzled. It was Mario. He said with concern in his voice, "Pete, you asked me to look after your wife, and I may have bad news. She was having dinner with a guy, and I think he put something in her drink. At least he got her out of here about 15 minutes ago, and she didn't look too good. At first, I thought he was just helping her to the bathroom, but I think they went out the back door. I don't see any of them here right now, and I've already checked." It gave me an electric shock of fear. I said, "Do you have any idea where they're going?" Mario said, "I have no idea, but if you hang on, I might be able to find out what he drives." After a couple of tense minutes, he came back and said, "Danny, the valet, says it was a gold Escalade." Mario added, "Good luck, mate. I never thought that bastard would do something like that." I knew it. If mere mortals defy the gods, they will face a cruel lesson. I tossed the Kindle into the passenger seat, revved the F-150's powerful engine, and sped out of the parking lot. All I could think was, karma is a heartless bitch, and Mr. Dares Murphy is never wrong. I shouldn't have let Janet indulge in such a crazy adventure. I was desperately trying to think of where he could take her. I knew I was doomed if he had a motel reservation. There are too many of them in this area. But Worth didn't seem like a man who planned ahead. He had bestial cunning, but not strategic thinking. So I tried to think of a secluded place that would attract him. He probably didn't want to go too far. There were many trees around Henry Ford's homestead to the north, and it was the most secluded place for miles, so it seemed like an obvious choice. If I'm wrong, Janet will pay the price, but I needed to do something. I said a prayer and stepped on the gas. Luckily, it was after 21 azo, and the roads that would have been crowded during the day were almost empty. I headed north and made one of those pointless Michigan U-turns and then headed back down Evergreen. The University of Michigan Dearborn campus was on the right. It looked deserted on a Friday evening. I turned off Evergreen onto Fair Lane Drive. This road led to Henry Ford's estate. It was completely dark there, even though it was right in the heart of a large metropolitan area. There was some residual light from the moonlight, but there were no street lights. I slowed down to 25 mph, looking for any sign of an Escalade. I thought I saw a shape as I drove past the driveway leading to a deserted place between Fair Lane and Evergreen Estate. I turned down this little path, and there he was. He parked in the circular courtyard that must have once led to the building. It was probably a former outbuilding on the estate, but now it was just a large clearing in the forest with one car parked at the top of the circle. Wirt might have seen my headlights if his Escalade's windows weren't so foggy. I grabbed the phone and called 911. I told them what was happening and where to send the police. Then I got out of the car and went to save my wife. I could see the Escalade shaking and heard the telltale sounds of sex coming from the rear of the car. I grabbed the door and opened it. It broke my heart. I saw all this instantly, because Wirt gathered his thoughts and rushed at me. I knew I needed to buy time until the police arrived. "You're in big trouble, kid," I said, trying to catch my breath. "You better start thinking about a good lawyer." As the police cars drew closer, Worth seemed to realize the gravity of his situation. He turned and tried to run away, but two police officers had already gotten out of their cars and were heading towards him. One of the officers shouted, "Stop, police." While the officers were handcuffing Worth, another approached me. "Are you okay, sir? Do you need medical attention?" he asked, examining me for injuries. "I'll be fine," I said, trying to even out my breathing. "My wife. "She's in that car." I pointed at the Escalade. While one officer attended to Wirt, another approached the vehicle to check on Janet. I followed him, my heart pounding with fear for her. The officer carefully opened the door. Janet was lying in the back seat, seemingly unconscious. She was breathing, but her face was pale and foam was visible on her lips. "We need an ambulance," the officer said quickly, already calling the emergency number on his radio. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later. Paramedics assessed Janet's condition, placed her on a stretcher, and loaded in the car. I followed the ambulance in the car, my thoughts full of anxiety and guilt. I shouldn't have let her go on that date. Now that she was in this state, I felt like it was my fault. At the hospital, I was not immediately allowed to see Janet. The doctors were busy examining her, and I was filled with fear as I waited in the hallway. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my head getting heavy with the possible consequences of everything that had happened. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, the doctor approached me. He was serious and got straight to the point. "Your wife is safe, but she was seriously exposed to substances. This explains why she was unconscious when you found her. We will continue to monitor to ensure that other serious problems have no consequences. You can see her, but she is still under the influence of the drug and may not be completely herself." I nodded, barely holding back tears, and followed the doctor into the room where Janet lay. When I entered, she seemed so fragile and vulnerable in the hospital bed, her pale face standing out against the snow-white pillow. My heart sank at the sight of her in such a state. She weakly opened her eyes and smiled when she saw me. "Pete," her voice was barely audible. "Yes, it's me, my love. I'm here," I whispered, taking her hand. "You'll feel better. Everything will be fine." She nodded, but her eyes were blurred, and she quickly fell back into a half asleep. Watching her, I felt a mixture of anger and powerlessness. I was so angry at Wirt for hurting her, and at myself for not being able to protect her. At that moment, two detectives entered the room. They introduced themselves and explained that they were investigating what happened. After several questions about what happened, they reported that Worth had already been arrested and would be charged with assault. "We will notify you of the court date," one of the detectives said. "Your testimony will be extremely important." After the detectives left, I sat down next to Janet, taking her hand. Despite the horrors of that night, I felt grateful that she was still with me, alive and safe. It was the only thing that mattered. Everything else, justice, revenge, the consequences of our actions, receded into the background. I was ready to fight for her, stand by her side, and protect her, no matter what it requires of me. Sitting there, holding her hand, I reflected on our journey. How complex relationships can be, and how unpredictable the circumstances are that present us with choices that can change our lives. But at that moment, I was sure of only one thing. The love I felt for Janet was endless and unconditional. A few hours later, when she had come to her senses a little and was able to communicate more consciously, we talked. She apologized for all this happening despite my warnings. I reassured her by telling her that all that mattered was that she was alive and safe. She cried, and I consoled her, promising that I would never let something like this happen again. Janet was deeply affected by the entire experience, and her recovery will take time, both physically and emotionally. We both knew there might be challenges ahead, but we decided to get through them together. Her strength and determination inspired me, and I was ready to support her no matter what lay ahead. We also decided that after everything that had happened, we should reconsider how we both viewed risk and safety in our lives. This event was a stark reminder that life can be unpredictable and sometimes cruel, and that we must do our best to protect each other and cherish every moment we have together. Later that day, as we were getting ready to go home from the hospital, I told Janet that despite the ordeal, I was happy that she was my wife. She smiled through her tears and said she loved me. This moment, despite all the chaos, was a reminder for both of us that ultimately it is love that makes life worth living. We left the hospital holding hands, ready to face the future together, no matter how unpredictable it might be.